Welcome along to another episode of the Play On Podcast, your favourite outlet for your weekly fix of all things Scottish football. I'm David Simmons. As always, I'm joined by Anthony Brown and Stephen Commons. Make sure you stay tuned for the next hour as we look back on the weekend's Scottish football in action, the highlights and the key talking points. On tonight's show, we're discussing the big game that's coming up this weekend, Celtic versus Rangers. Derek McInnes departs the Dons and Rangers' performance in Europe. There'll be much more to discuss as well. We'll be looking at the likes of candidates for the Celtic job next season. Apparently there's somebody that's quite keen on it. So we'll be discussing that. You love that one, Stephen, don't you? But we want to hear from you guys. The show is built on opinions and we want you to get yours across, so make sure you get in touch. We're live and interactive for the next hour, so drop your message with your views on any of the points that we're discussing on tonight's show. Don't forget as well, if you're watching via YouTube, like I say every week, remember and subscribe to the State of Mind YouTube channel. Got well over 10,000 subscribers now enjoying free daily content, so you know what to do. Get on over and subscribe to the State of Mind YouTube page. If you're on Twitter as well, follow the show. Get on it. With the Play On Podcast, give us a follow on Twitter. Right, I was going to say it's another busy week. That's how I normally start the show. There wasn't a lot happening on the field at the weekend. There was only 2 games on, but there's been plenty happening off field. So this weekend, newly crowned champions Rangers attend Celtic Park this coming weekend. It should be a thrilling encounter coming up. In the press, Steven Gerrard has told Rangers fans to stay away from Sunday's Old Firm derby at Celtic Park. The manager issued an open letter saying the best place you can support the players is from the comfort of your own home. It comes after thousands, as we know last week, broke COVID guidelines to celebrate the club's title success last weekend. The game could end up being postponed. The Scottish Government cannot be assured such scenes will not be repeated as what we've seen last weekend. Stephen, I'm going to start with you with this one. Do you think we'll see better behaviour from even, well, obviously Rangers fans, but Celtic fans have done protests in the past. We're not saying they're completely innocent, but do you think overall we'll see the right style of behaviour leading up to this game?
I would certainly hope so. I don't think anybody would have any excuses. I mean, obviously we spoke about this last week and we had kind of erred on the side of this could happen when you have just this massive outpouring of emotion for winning the league, and they would have no excuse for this now. And I think the police Scotland and the government alongside that would have to be a lot more prepared and be a lot more prepared to be heavy-handed, if need be, hand out more fines, more arrests, because this would be on the back of what happened last week or 2 weeks ago, to the point when the derby comes around. We weren't excusing the behaviour. We were trying to explain kind of what happened and why we thought it happened. I don't think there's any excuse if that happens again, for either side. Whether the Celtic fans see that as they did it, so we're going to do the same thing, or the Rangers fans think that it's acceptable to do the same thing again by going to Celtic Park and, I mean, going to their own stadium and celebrating is not. It's still against the law, but you can kind of understand it. Going to your rival stadium and basically trying to goad them is completely different. We all know what the political situation and football and terms can get dragged into that in Glasgow, and that could be an absolute disaster. So I think the clubs are doing the right thing. Whether Celtic should have got dragged into that along with Rangers is debatable. I think Celtic have probably just used it as a kind of box ticking exercise, said, yeah, we'll do the right thing and we'll go along with this. But I think that the most important thing was to get Steven Gerrard, James Tavernier, anybody else high profile at Rangers to kind of put this out in chapter and verse to say, listen guys, we've had our celebration, we've enjoyed it, it's over, we're now back to business and we're now back in the middle of a pandemic. If you guys really realistically want to get back into the stadium next year and see us raise the league flag, see us try and defend our title, then stay home, stay safe, adhere to the rules. Because if you don't, there's absolutely no chance that there's going to be people in the stadiums potentially beyond the summer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Anthony, I'm going to come to you next. On Friday just past there, the Justice Secretary said a final decision whether this match will go ahead will take place early next. Obviously, what we're on just now. What do you think they're waiting for? I mean, to make that decision whether yes or no this game's going to go ahead. I mean, they can't predict the future. I mean, I'm not saying by any means you're like a political expert that knows what's going to happen here, but are they looking for some sort of reaction or statement from fans to say, do you know what, no, that's fine with respect to the government now? Or how do you think they're going to make that decision to say, yeah, we're going to call the game off, or no, we're going to let it go ahead?
I think they've probably already decided that the game's going ahead. I dare say that was never in any doubt. they're probably just wanting the clubs to be on side with them and put out messages, which they have done over the past few days. As Stephen says, there's no excuse for anybody turning up on this weekend for the game. Ultimately, it's a dead rubber. There's no fans in the stadium. It's one of the most meaningless Old Firms games for several years. So there's no really, apart from if Rangers fans wanted to turn up and try and rub Celtic fans' noses in it, there's no excuse for anybody turning up at this stadium. We tried to sort of understand how that situation arose last week. Rangers had obviously won their first league title in 10 years. I think that explains the big outpouring, but there would be no excuse and no valid explanation for any sort of similar scene this weekend. So I would think that everybody's had their moment last week. Hopefully that's the last of it. I dare say there will be a few idiots that try and turn up, but hopefully they are in the complete minority and they're easy enough to be controlled by the authorities.
Yeah, there's some comments coming already. Hi to Scott Stephen 19. It'll be a boring 0-0. Nothing will happen and it'll pass peacefully. I'm sure that's what the Scottish Government want to hear as well. Hi to David Kelly for the message. Thanks. The game won't get called off. The backlash would be far too much for the government. I kind of agree with that as well. I've been a bit busy doing things before the show. I believe there's been a statement being released by Scott Brown and the Celtic side of things. Stephen, you mentioned that you're not sure why Celtic got kind of dragged into this after the behaviour of the opposite side of fans. Tell us a bit more about that statement in case anybody else like myself's maybe not fully read it.
I think Celtic released it just probably about an hour ago to say that that John Kennedy, Scott Brown and other high-ranking people within Celtic today had a meeting face-to-face, probably over Zoom, I would imagine, with Jason Leach and the Joint Response Group. And off the back of that, they have asked Scott Brown to make a statement, which he does do in the article that Celtic published, basically saying exactly what you would expect to hear from a Celtic captain, saying, listen guys, nobody turn up here, this is our place of work, you're putting us at danger, you're putting everybody else, you're putting yourself at danger. So he's done exactly what you would expect him to do, same as Tavernier did earlier in the week. It'll probably stick in the throat a wee bit of Celtic, and I would imagine that they'll have something to say to Jason Leach in terms of, well, how is this acceptable? What are we actually doing behind the scenes to make sure that our staff, players, matchday people who are going to be here are going to be safe? Because ultimately that's not Celtic's responsibility. Their responsibility is what happens on the park and in the surrounding areas of the stadium. In the greater area of Parkhead or around the stadium or around the streets, that's the government's through the police. That's their domain. So as much as Celtic and Rangers can do as much as they have done now, and you could argue that Rangers probably should have done this in the run-up to the St Mirren game. The Celtic have done what they needed to do. They've adhered to everything, but I think it was pretty clear in the statement that they were by no means kind of putting their own fans in with what happened last week, and I think that's important for them to do that. They obviously had that pretty infamous statement during the week as well about one club since 1888 just kind of differentiating themselves from the Old Firm because lazy journalism from down south and from up here has kind of put all Old Firm fans in together, which I think is unfair in this circumstance. So Celtic this week have kind of done what they need to do. They've made it clear that they're not seeing themselves as part of what happened, but they are also taking the responsibility seriously as one of the main players in the Scottish football game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Keep the messages coming. I am reading through them as we're talking. Hi to Ian. He thinks the game should go ahead. Don't think there will be any trouble. Let's hope for that indeed, Ian. Thanks for the comment. Our very first comment that came in, and I think what I'm going to take from this, Toto, why isn't the board telling the fans of their future plans? So I kind of maybe get that side of things. So the clubs are maybe quick enough to come out and say, don't do this, don't do that. But they maybe won't liaise with the fans when they want to know when will a new manager be put in permanent place, when will, from a Celtic side of things, definitely looking at your image, I think you might be a Celtic fan, so can you kind of get that side of things? Fans, they get that there's statements coming out, Anthony, but what they really want to hear is why should they buy their season ticket again next season? What's going to change at the club? When's the rebuild going to start at Celtic?
Yeah, I guess every supporter wants to know as much as possible about the football club, and especially at a time like this when there's no manager beyond John Kennedy in terms of the caretaker aspect of it. There's no indication of what's happening, so I can totally understand Celtic fans wanting to know how this is going to play out, what happens next, what should they expect in the coming days, weeks and months. And I don't know, maybe we're doing Celtic a disservice here, but it does suggest maybe they don't know at this point what way they're going to go, so they don't want to say too much, they don't want to back themselves into a corner. I would hope they've had long enough to sort of consider. I mean, even before Neil Lennon was removed, the writing was on the wall for long enough that you would think they have a reasonable idea of what they want to do and how this is all going to play out. But I guess they're probably just keeping quiet because they don't want to nail their colours to any mast at the moment where people can hold them to it and say, oh, but you said we were going to have a manager by the end of March or the end of April, and then people say, oh, you don't know what you're doing, sort of thing. So I suppose by saying nothing, they protect themselves from that. But equally, as from a supporter's perspective, they will be wanting to know, when are we going to get a new manager? What type of manager are we looking for? And I guess, I mean, Celtic don't have to come out and tell their supporters that. They can just wait. They maybe don't want to give too much away about what road they want to go down. But yeah, it does feel like a period of sort of lull and limbo at the moment for Celtic. There's nothing really happening that's sort of whetting the appetite, getting the juices flowing among supporters. It's just a case of sort of enduring the remainder of this season until such time as somebody's ready to be appointed. And we're still looking in from the outside. We're still no clearer about what way they're going to go. I mean, Roy Keane's the one that's touting himself in the last few days. I mean, I think anybody who's watched knows my thoughts on Roy Keane as a potential Celtic manager. I think it's a pointless venture. I don't think he's got the. I don't know. I'm just not a massive fan of Roy Keane, and particularly as a manager. So I would be looking elsewhere in that regard. But I mean, Eddie Howe, Sean Maloney, Roberto Martinez, Steve Clark. These are the guys that have been linked over the last few weeks, and still nobody's really homed in on any particular target and said this is going to be the guy. So it's a period, I suppose, and similar to Aberdeen, there's this period of what's going to happen next. But I guess Aberdeen have only just got rid of their manager, so they've got a wee bit more of an explanation, I guess, for not making it clear what direction they're going to go in just yet. But I suppose Celtic fans are entitled to get some sort of indication, even if it's just we're taking our time to establish what way we're going to go next. I mean, obviously the Peter Lawwell situation muddies the waters, the fact he's moving on in the summer. So who knows what's going on behind the scenes in terms of how Celtic are actually planning for replacing Neil Lennon.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Stephen, we touched on this last week. I think we even touched on it the week before as well. So I'm quite conscious that I may be repeating myself here, going over talking points. But this one's growing arms and legs, because I've seen two managers this week already. Yogi Hughes was one, said it in his press conference, and ex-Celtic manager now has come out, Mr. Brendan Rodgers, saying that Celtic should provide a guard of honour. Now, this really did kick off the comments last week, so I'm conscious we're not going to dive into this too much. Celtic should show, easy for me to say, humility and class by giving rivals Rangers a guard of honour in Sunday's Old Firm fixture. That's exactly what Brendan Rodgers said. I think he's been listening to you, Stephen, because the Leicester City boss went on and said his old team, with who he won the Scottish Premiership titles with, should use it as motivation for next season. Exactly what you kind of said. The question I'm going to ask, which we never really touched on last week, was who makes that decision? I mean, obviously the fans. I mean, last week the comments that were coming through, no way, don't give a guard of honour, no chance. Do it and make them feel eat their cake and eat it, and all that was all the comments that was coming through. But who gets the final say? Is it going to be the board? Is it going to be the manager? Because that's why I'll be tuning in on Sunday, because I want to see how they handle that.
I think ultimately it'll be, I would imagine John Kennedy and Scott Brown will probably make the decision. They'll kind of put their heads together and say, what do you think we should do here? I don't think the board will be involved at all. I think I actually watched Brendan Rodgers' interview, and I did think exactly what you said. Has this guy been listening to me? But I agreed with his point, obviously, from the same sort of point of view that I'd said, that they should use it as a kind of a motivational tool. In terms of honour and sportsman conduct and things like that, I don't think that should really come into it, to be honest. Like, if they feel strongly enough that they don't want to do it, then don't do it. It's not. I think there's been so much made of this that and people keep talking about. they will either do it or they won't do it, and it's not. The end of this game is not going to be dictated by, oh my God, like Celtic are an absolute disgrace because they didn't do it. But I just think if I'm looking from a Celtic point of view and I'm in charge and I'm going to be here next season, I would want the players who are going to be here next season to have that burning desire within them to sort of say, I'm not going through that again. That's embarrassing. Like, I'm not standing there applauding on our biggest rivals onto the park. That is never going to happen to me again. But if that's not something that Celtic think that is important to them at this moment in time, then don't do it. I'll be honest with you, I don't think anyone at Rangers, I don't think Steven Gerrard's going to be losing any sleep thinking, I wonder if I'm going to get if my players are going to get a guard of honour. I just think that there's been too much made of it, to be honest.
I mean, podcasts like this don't help when we keep stirring it up. But the other side of the coin, which I'm going to say, Anthony, is so if Celtic do it, like we say, it gives them that motivation. We're not going through this again next season. We're coming back bigger, stronger and better because we're not doing this next season. So let's just say they don't do the guard of honour. Are the Rangers players then going to come out and go, do you know what, going to show us that respect? Well, here's a 3-0 defeat, take that. Is it going to inspire them a bit more to give that extra bit in the 90 minutes? Because we need to remember as well, Rangers could still go unbeaten this season as well.
I think Rangers, as you say, have got enough motivation to try and go unbeaten, I suppose, without throwing into the mix whether Celtic do or don't give them a guard of honour. I honestly don't think it's a big deal. Like, I think Celtic will probably do it because it's seen as the right thing to do, and I think even a lot of Celtic supporters will probably say, "I just do it because it's the done thing," sort of thing. But equally, I've got no real strong feeling on this one. To be honest, it just doesn't interest me whether Celtic or Rangers do it to each other. It's pretty irrelevant in the grand scheme, and by full time, I don't think it's going to be a big part of the narrative unless it's a 0-0 draw and there's nothing else to talk about.
Yeah, no, but
sorry, son. Is he going back to what you were talking about before about Celtic board kind of giving more information out to the fans? Obviously, that's been a massive issue. Like throughout the season, I think obviously it's been magnified by what's happened on the park and the failings that have kind of happened. But I think when something, obviously, I know as being a Hearts fan, when things start going wrong on the park, then you start looking off the park with a bit more forensic detail. And I think the Celtic fans, if they had won 10 in a row this year, there would nobody be even questioning what was going on at board level or the interaction with fans. But because of these things have been magnified. And I read something earlier in the week that Celtic had potentially put feelers out to like a management recruitment company to sort of say, we are looking to potentially get a technical director. We want candidates who are interested in the job to be lined up for interview. And then there's obviously a lot of talk about the boy from Man City, Fergal. I forget his second name, but the guy who's like a technical director at Man City, if he was to come in, because I think he's had a lot of. I was listening to John Collins' interview on BBC, and he was saying that when him and Ronnie Dyler were at Celtic, they had a lot of dealings with him because obviously they took quite a lot of players on loan from Man City. So if that is what Celtic are doing behind the scenes at this moment in time, why not just come out and say that? Why not just come out and say, listen guys, at this moment in time, we are considering changing the structure of the club. We're considering changing the structure at boardroom level, which will ultimately support any new management team that we put in. So at this moment in time, we're doing this. We're still open to candidates for coming in for the new head coach's role. We will obviously consider John Kennedy as well, so you're not putting his nose out the joint. And just say that. Just come out with a 5-line statement, which would, I mean, it's not going to appease everybody, but it's going to at least tell everyone that we're not just sitting here with our thumbs up our backsides doing nothing, like which a lot of people will think that they're doing because of the failings that have happened this season. So Celtic's boards they just need to be. I don't know whether it's an arrogance or a stupidity. I don't know. These are their customers. These are people who've lined the pockets of this club. Like, if you want to, I've got no doubt about it. They will sell probably as many season tickets next year as they did this year, no matter what happens, because football fans, it's like a drug to them. They can't stop. But at the same time, you don't just take that for granted, because if that goes on for a prolonged period of time, we've seen it before. Celtic fans will talk with their feet, same as any other fans. So I think they just need to be a bit more sensible about it. There's no trying to like show your hand. Just kind of let the fans know at a very, very high level what's going on.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, Anthony, we discussed the chances of Rangers going undefeated for the whole season. A key member of the Rangers side that's allowed that to happen is veteran goalkeeper Alan McGregor. I mean, how vital has he been for Rangers? I don't know if you've seen the performance during the week there in the Europa League. But that save at 39-year-old, I mean, I was a goalkeeper myself. I'm a goalkeeping coach now. To get down that quickly and make that save at that age and maintaining that throughout the whole season, that standard, that's frightening, mate.
Yeah, he's been a key player, arguably. Well, certainly been one of their key players this season, and he's out of contract next season. That'll be a concern for Steven Gerrard, because I don't think you replace a guy like that easily. He's obviously, they've got John McLaughlin waiting in the wings, and he's a very good goalkeeper as well, but I'm not sure he's quite at the level of McGregor in terms of quality, consistency, and just being able to continually pull off these unbelievable saves. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. I mean, you've got Craig Gordon, Alan McGregor, two Edinburgh boys born pretty much within the same year. I think one's 38, one's 39. And arguably Scotland's two of their best players of the 21st century, with the exception of the left back, Robertson and Tierney probably could have a say in that, and obviously Darren Fletcher. But I mean, it's incredible that Edinburgh has managed to produce these two unbelievable goalkeepers that are arguably the two greatest goalkeepers Scotland have ever produced. I mean, certainly in my lifetime, you'd be up against Gorham and Leighton, and beyond that, I couldn't comment because I've not seen enough Scotland goalkeepers to say about the best ever. I mean, I saw Chris Boyd saying he's undoubtedly the best Scottish goalkeeper ever. I think that's a bit bold, because I don't even think you could decide between McGregor and Gordon. I think some people will say Gordon's, others will say McGregor. It's a debate. I don't think you could say undoubtedly one is superior to the other, because they're both absolutely brilliant and they're keepers for Scotland to be proud of. And I suppose the only downside, I guess, is that McGregor isn't available for selection for going to the Euros because he's retired. I mean, going there with Gordon and Marshall and McGregor, you'd be thinking, wow, what a set of goalkeepers to pick from. I mean, I actually think Gordon and McGregor are both superior to Marshall, but Marshall's the man in possession of the gloves by dint of his recent heroics. So that's, but yeah, going back to your initial point about McGregor's importance to Rangers, hugely important. If he doesn't sign a new contract for any reason, then Rangers have got I wouldn't say a void to fill, because I think McLaughlin would probably be the man that would just step up and fill it, but you'd certainly have a little drop off in quality, I think, in terms of what McGregor brings to the table.
Absolutely. I mean, and that just tees me up nicely for your question, Stephen, because, I mean, we mentioned it before. Could things been a little bit tighter this season if Celtic hadn't released Craig Gordon? Obviously, as a Hearts fan, Stephen, you've caught yourself an absolute beauty there in Craig Gordon, but
yeah,
that you mentioned the void that McGregor would leave, Anthony. I mean, the void that Craig Gordon left at Celtic, I mean, it hasn't really been filled, even though they went out, they got Barkas. I mean, Bain's been playing a lot more recently. Celtic never really replaced Craig Gordon, did they?
It's a slightly different situation, because Craig Gordon wasn't actually playing when he decided to leave. Like, they offered him a new contract as kind of maybe their third choice goalie, and like it was a vastly reduced money. But in hindsight's a wonderful thing. Like, obviously at that point they thought, well, we're keeping Foster. We're probably going to get, well, we've got Bain and got Craig Gordon will be a reliable third choice goalie. In hindsight, Fraser Foster then, for whatever reason, decided not to sign. They brought in Barkas, who was a disaster. Bain has not had a good season. They've had the boy Connor Hazard playing. And in hindsight, you look at that and think Craig Gordon would have been a reliable, fit, number one, still keep. I mean, I understand you're playing in the Championship, but the semi-final, the Scottish Cup against Hibs, Craig Gordon makes, I think, two absolutely stunning saves in the game. There isn't a game that's gone by, really, without me going at some point, wow, I just cannot believe that we've got a goalie at that level playing for us in the Championship. It's incredible. And Celtic, if you look back on it now and say, if Craig Gordon had played from start to finish, would Celtic's league position be better? I believe it would have. I don't think that there have been many glaring errors from the Celtic keepers. Like, we said that about Barkas. I don't know if he's a good shot stopper or not, because I've never seen him make a save. But Craig Gordon, one of our good friends who's a goalkeeper, always tells me a goalie should only be judged on the mistakes he makes. And Craig Gordon, quite simply, doesn't make mistakes, and he will pull off saves that he has absolutely no right to make. And then obviously McGregor on Thursday night did exactly that. In the vital moment when his team needed him, he made a save he had absolutely no right to make. The most interesting thing about that I kind of read last week was Peter Lovenkrands, I think, was getting interviewed about him, and he'd said that number one, McGregor will not have, he'll have come off that pitch and he won't have accepted anybody patting him on the back. He would have been doing a Spanish Inquisition about whose guy it was, whose header it was. He says that's just the kind of person he is. He is not someone who wants adulation or someone to tell him he's done well. He just wants his team to be better. He just wants to stand on those goals and have no shots into him. And that it's maybe that sort of drive for perfection that's maybe got him to where he is, and kind of. But nah, I mean, I think the situation is I don't think he's going to go and play for anybody else. I don't think that's even a possibility. I think the only thing would be that if he gets to the end of the season and his body's screaming at him saying, "Listen, we can't do this for much longer." He strikes me as the kind of guy that will probably want to go out on a high. And if he is at that situation where he's not 100% convinced that his body's going to take it for another season, he might decide not to bother.
No, absolutely. I mean, just reiterating, what you just said there. I mean, I don't know if you've seen his interview with Emma Dodds on BT Sport afterwards. He never took any credit for it. He just kind of shrugged it off and just took it on the chin.
I heard them say, you chuck a hand down, sometimes they stay out, sometimes they go in.
Exactly. I think that was his exact words. Exactly. Hi to David Kelly. Can't believe we let Gordon go and paid $5 million for Barcast. Someone's head should have rolled for that. No, I kind of agree. And maybe someone's head has rolled for that. Maybe that's why Lennon's no longer there. Right. So, I mean, I seen a headline on BBC Football Scotland, BBC Sports Scotland, it was their website. It was just the other day. It says, is this the most difficult season to be a manager? It's against the backdrop, obviously, the pandemic, and a season like no other. Half the Scottish Premiership, 12 clubs have actually shed their managers. The latest, obviously, being that of Derek McInnes. I mean, we've talked about him near enough every week here on the Play On podcast. Anthony, what probably was the right time for McInnes to move on, wasn't
it? Yes and no. I don't think from my perspective, it's not as clear cut as that. I think from the Aberdeen supporters' perspective, I think it was the time for Derek McInnes to go. I think too many, arguably a majority, had become fed up with his style of football. They weren't tolerating the results, even though it still had them in the top four, and they couldn't see progress. I get all that. I accept all that. And arguably, it was time for him to go on that basis, because once the fan base turns, it creates a negative vibe around the club, and it's very hard for the team to get any positive momentum going. However, I would couch that by saying I'm just not convinced Aberdeen are going to move forward without him. I don't see anybody jumping off the page saying I am an outstanding Aberdeen managerial candidate. I don't see anybody who's got any experience of finishing in the top four beyond Neil Lennon and Craig Levein, who are available. And Craig Levein was 15, 20 years ago and is a non-starter in terms of being a contender for this job. Neil Lennon, as much as he could say I finished in the top four with Hibs and I've obviously won titles and cups with Celtic, I don't think, given his recent exploits with Celtic, I don't think he would be accepted as an Aberdeen manager. And then you're going into what looks likely to happen, the Stephen Glass / Scott Brown managerial dream team. On paper, I like the look of it. I think it's ambitious. I think it's not ambitious. That's the wrong word. It's risky. It's bold, and I can see the merit in it from the perspective. I like when teams do take a little bit of a gamble and go for somebody who's maybe considered a bit left field, but I just can't be convinced that this is a surefire winner. I just think the way I look at it is, if Hearts or Hibs were looking for a manager right now, if Jack Ross or Robbie Neilson walked out the door, Derek McInnes would be top of their list of candidates, ahead of all the guys Aberdeen are currently looking for.
I would sack Robbie Neilson tomorrow if it was up to me, and get Derek McInnes in. That's how much I rate.
I think there's a lot of Hearts and probably even Hibs supporters of that mindset. I know there will be others that say, no, Derek McInnes, terrible football and all that, but I don't get that. I don't. His record is beyond all dispute for me in terms of what he's done over the 8 years. I get there has been a drop-off in the last couple of seasons and it's not been as emphatic. But even finishing in the top four is still, it's not a gimme for Aberdeen, Hearts, Hibs, Dundee United, even spending a lot of money. You don't guarantee finishing in the top four. St Johnstone, Kilmarnock, Motherwell, these teams are all perfectly capable of getting into the top four. at the expense of a supposed bigger club. If Aberdeen I know there's a lot of Aberdeen fans that think just get rid of McInnes and get somebody else in and we'll go to another level. I just don't see that happening. I'm not saying it can't happen. Of course it can happen. But there's no precedent for a team of Aberdeen, Hearts or Hibs standard pushing right on. Beyond that one season where Hearts did it when Romanoff first brought George Burley in and Hearts split a proper, solid Celtic and Rangers teams. They got in, finished second behind Celtic. No team's ever done it. No team's ever really done it with style. And I just think Aberdeen fans, I understand things have gone stale, but I think they're maybe hankering for something that is unobtainable on Aberdeen's budget. Aberdeen fans will completely disagree and say, oh, the football's crap, we deserve better and all that. I can't convince you otherwise if that's the way you feel. But I just think in 2 or 3 years' time, there is a danger here of Aberdeen fans thinking, why did we let him go? And I know you can't continue to live your life thinking, well, the guy's done this, that and the other. We can't keep him on forever. But at the same time, Aberdeen are not in a relegation battle. They're literally fourth in the league. A lot of teams would be absolutely delighted to be fourth in the league in a perceived bad season.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I can see the Stephen Glass thing, but I mean, will Mr. Celtic, Scott Brown, leave a potential coaching role at Celtic to go be assistant manager at Aberdeen, Stephen?
It really depends where his head's at, to be honest. I mean, I think Celtic will be loath to lose him. Like, number one, he's the club captain. Number two, he's the leader of the dressing room. And number three, they're in a transitional period. They're obviously, there's going to be a high turnover of players. We know that. Everyone knows that because the loans, the guys who are going to be sold, everyone knows that that's going to happen. There's obviously going to be change at the top. There's going to be change at management level. So if having somebody like Scott Brown in that dressing room beyond into next season would potentially be very, very important for them because, I mean, Celtic are an old established club. They're a club that have got certain levels, certain things that and guys like Scott Brown who have learned it from the people above him, from Neil Lennon at points probably. They know what it means to be a Celtic player. They know what it means to go out and represent those fans week in, week out, home, away. We need to win. And losing Scott Brown out that dressing room, you would then have James Forrest, your most experienced player. James Forrest is obviously a very good player, but he doesn't strike me as the kind of guy that's going to go around the dressing room and rile folk up and say, "Listen, that's not acceptable here. We're Celtic." So. From that side of things, it's unthinkable that they would lose him and let him go. But if Scott Brown, as a player, thinks, well, I've probably only got one season left, if that. So if I really want to go out at Celtic, maybe playing 10, 15 games in the season, coming in here and there and just playing bit part, and being maybe a bit more heavily involved with the coaching at youth level, then fine, that's what I'll do. But if he truly believes that he still has something to offer Scottish football, and Aberdeen are saying to him, "Well, come in here, we'll let you have a say in the team selection, and you will play whenever you're fit. You'll play because our standard of players is nowhere near as good as Celtic's is." Then maybe that's something that'll appeal to him. Maybe getting out of the hurly-burly Goldfish Bowl, the Old Firm, might also appeal to him and say, "Listen, I just maybe want to play another year up here in Aberdeen, learn my trade, do what John Terry's doing, and be an assistant manager at a big club." In Scottish football terms, Aberdeen are a big club. Be an assistant manager here, learn the ropes, maybe go and manage somewhere, and then at some point go on and be the Celtic manager. Because even as much a legend as Scott Brown is now, he's not stepping into that Celtic job as it stands. Even if he goes and manages their under-23s for a season, he's still not going to be the first choice to get that job if things don't work out with the next manager. So the one thing I did like about this Aberdeen potential of Stephen Glass is it's exactly what Celtic failed to do. So you've got Stephen Glass, who's now kind of odds on that he's going to get the job, and straight away he's saying, "Well, I'm going to bring in Scott Brown as my assistant manager, and I'm going to bring in Alan Russell as my coach, he's the striker coach that works with the English national team, a Scottish guy." Straight away he's saying, "I'm coming in here, but I'm bringing my own people, and this is how I want to run it." And you can see he's thought it through, and he's been given, if he is given the job, he's been given carte blanche to say, "Go and get your own folk, do whatever you want." But at Celtic, Neil Lennon was never afforded that. he was told, this is your assistant manager, this is your coach, because that's Damien Duff was his coach. This is your coaching staff. You work with that, and so in that terms, Aberdeen seem to be going about things the right way. But again, it'll all depend. We'll see what happens when people actually get hired.
Mm-hmm. No, it should be a good one to watch, that vacancy. Obviously, it was Derek McInnes that left that vacancy. He's now being linked to the Sheffield United job, Anthony. I mean, former Hibs manager Heckingbottom was in charge at the weekend down there at Sheffield United. It didn't go to plan. Would that be a step up for McInnes? Obviously playing in the Premiership, but if he could somehow save Sheffield United, he'd be a hero, wouldn't he?
Well, I don't think he's going to save Sheffield United, but I think he'd be absolutely delighted if he managed to get that job after being edged out of Aberdeen. Because I did speculate where will Derek McInnes, or no, but I didn't speculate on here, but because he left the club just a couple of minutes after we finished last week. But I did wonder, where is he going to end up next? Because I think his stock is probably not damaged, because I think if he shows his CV of what he's done at Aberdeen to anybody, they're going to say brilliant, fantastic. However, his star's probably not as quite as high as it was a few years ago when Sunderland and Rangers were wanting to hire him. So I think it would be a stretch to see him being appointed Sheffield United manager on the back of what some people might deem to be getting emptied out of Aberdeen on a downer. Going into the English Premier League doesn't strike me as an obvious pathway for somebody who's just been forced out of Aberdeen. However, would he be in contention for the Sheffield United job on the basis that they are probably going to be a championship team next year? Possibly more. I think
if I was
in some ways,
I would hang out and wait for West Brom, because obviously if they go down, Big Sam's going to get binned out. That. And he's a former West Brom player. He's got a very, very good reputation down there with the West Brom fans. If they look at that and say, if he's good enough for Sheffield United, if we go down, why could he not come here and do a job? I think if he's got a brain in his head, that's what I would be looking at.
I did wonder when the Birmingham job came up today if that might be one that he might get linked with. I don't think you can be. A few years ago, Derek McInnes could have probably picked his job in the English Championship, but I don't know if he's going to have that luxury now. I don't know if he's going to maybe have to look towards the high end of League One or even the bottom end of the Championship, or even bide his time until the Hearts or Hibs or Dundee United jobs were to become available, because we can rave about him all we like, but ultimately his last couple of years haven't been great, and so he's not a manager that's necessarily been spoken of in boardrooms the way he would have been 2 or 3 years ago. So I think it might be a bit fanciful to imagine him getting the Sheffield United job at the moment, given that they are still fundamentally a Premier League team. But certainly if he was to, I think he deserves a crack at a job of that magnitude, but there are so many managers out there, and there's probably one or two whose stock is there's going to be several managers whose stock is a bit higher at the moment than Derek McInnes's. So Sheffield United might be one that, maybe his name might be mentioned, but I can't imagine him getting appointed there. It doesn't look like Paul Heckingbottom's going to get appointed there either after his baptism of fire yesterday.
By the way, one thing that I've never ever seen, I've not seen much like press coverage of this potential at all, but Chris Wilder, why has he not been touted for the Celtic job?
Oh, he has. So that was one they never mentioned. Yeah, he has.
I've never seen his name mentioned anywhere official. Like I've seen it on Twitter and stuff, but I don't think I've seen anybody.
There seems to be a wee bit of hype starting to build around him that's what he was spoken about on Sky Sports. But he's certainly another one, I suppose, in some ways similar to Eddie Howe in the sense that a guy that did a good job bringing a team up from the Championship. And I guess the problem is the way it's unravelled so badly for Sheffield United this season. But that's the danger when you bring a team up, that it's a totally different league up there. You can be absolutely fantastic in the Championship, but if you don't have the resource, you can get found out in the Premier League. But he did have a good season last year as well, so he's proven he can do it over more than one season.
Yeah, I mean, while we're talking about managers, like I said, I mean, this is the most difficult season to be a manager. If you look at some of the managers who have departed, we've got McInnes, Gary Holt, Stuart Kettlewell, Stephen Robinson, Alex Dyer, Neil Lennon as well, obviously. So, I mean, 3 of the bottom 4 here in Scotland have replaced their manager. Is it a case of no one really wants to go down in this climate, Stephen, do they?
Oh, 100%. People are rolling dices all over the place, apart from Hamilton, because they've obviously got the legend Brian Rice, mate. So, but nah, you're right. I think it's potentially a bit of a double-edged sword, that question, because I think Neil Lennon got more time in his job because there was no fans. I think Derek McInnes probably the same, because there was no, as much as there's noise on social media, that's really easy to ignore if you're Dave Cormack or if you're Peter Law. Whereas if you're in a stadium with 65,000 people going absolutely bananas, it's a lot more difficult to, or not turning up. It's a lot more difficult to ignore that. So it's a double-edged sword. I think there's some managers that potentially stayed in the job longer than they would have, and I think there are other people who, as you say, the financial climate has driven the narrative around their jobs.
Yeah, no.
I think going back to that question though about the hardest. I mean, Stephen's answered it in a different way in terms of the lack of supporters has in some way made it easier for managers. But I would say probably for 90% of teams and managers, the pandemic has made it far harder in terms of just being able to. There must be so many obstacles that they're having to deal with that we're not aware of just behind the scenes that just make life that bit more difficult than it was a year or so ago. And just not having fans in the stadium, I think for the vast majority of teams have probably been affected by that. I don't think anybody's playing scintillating football. I don't think anybody, or the perception is that nobody's really playing great football in this pandemic. And I think the most dramatic thing is Celtic and Liverpool. The way those two teams have dropped off, that's not just loss of form or anything. That's a whole change in circumstances in terms of not having supporters. It's changed the game completely. And these are two teams that fundamentally are driven by passionate supporters, whether they're brilliant or whether they're not. In terms of Celtic might not be winning the league every year, but they're always driven by passionate supporters. And that can manifest itself in the team getting on the players' backs if things are not going well, but it probably gives them a jolt. In the current situation with no fans in the stadium, they've got nobody willing them on. It's a total different, I don't know about mindset for the players, but it must just feel completely different. I know they've been playing in it for the best part of a year now, but in terms of motivation and feeling like you are on top of the world playing in front of 50, 60,000 people, you don't have that. So,
but if you're a chairman now and you're looking at bringing in, whether it be Aberdeen or Birmingham or Celtic, if you're a chairman, are you looking at this now saying, well, we don't know what lies in the future? Are we looking at somebody who's going to come in and be able to motivate these players no matter what? Or is that not as important as I'm making out here? Like, is that your number one thing?
I think if Jurgen Klopp's struggling with it, I think that gives Neil Lennon how can you expect Neil Lennon to motivate his players? I'm not saying it totally excuses lack of motivation. Of course it doesn't. But I think at the end of the day, footballers are human. They're the same as you or I. They can be programmed to operate at the top level, but ultimately it's only a very tiny minority will be able to keep the performance at that level week in, week out with no supporters in the stadium. I mean, it is. There will be some players probably enjoy having no fans because they've not got them getting on their back. But I think the majority probably thrive on having supporters in the stadium. Just the buzz of these guys are all here to see me, watch me play, watch me do my thing. And when you don't have that, you're going to pass the ball sideways and you're going to probably just go through the motions a wee bit, keep the ball for a bit, as opposed to if you try and do that in a full stadium, you're passing the ball about pretty passively. The fans will get on your back. They'll want the ball to go forward, and so it will result in probably quicker football. Whereas if there's no fans in the stadium, there probably is an element of this feels a little bit like a training match. We're not playing full pelt. And then your opposition, say, for example, Livingston against Celtic, they come in your faces and suddenly you're like, whoa, this was supposed to be like a training match, but now yous are coming after us. Whereas previously they had 60,000 Celtic supporters getting on at the Celtic players, and it would subconsciously, I'm sure, have an effect in their performance. So I think in terms of playing in the pandemic, I've touched on this before, I've got massive sympathy for players and managers because the goalposts have moved in terms of the conditions around a match day. It's a totally different ball game, to use a couple of cliches there, but it's a totally different thing to get used to. And I think we've seen that with the way some of the league championships have unfolded this season. There's been a few surprises all across Europe, really, in terms of big clubs struggling, and generally teams underperforming or not playing to a level that we're used to.
Yeah, I mean, well, hopefully we can welcome fans back as soon as we can. Hopefully they're back in time for the World Cup, because Scotland are going to announce their squad tomorrow. Do you think there'll be any shock inclusions in that team, Stephen?
I would suspect so. I would suspect, like, it's difficult because Steve Clarke will need to balance up having a look at some people. He'll maybe, I think, I don't know if he'll be allowed to even do this under COVID regulations, would be to name a bigger squad than what he would be maybe using for the game, and get some people in around the camp and have a look at them. But again, I don't know what the regulations are.
It's 3 games, so they might have scope to name a big squad, because what they play in the Austria, Faroe Islands and Israel, so they might have scope to name a slightly bigger squad than he would.
Which I think will help. If that is the case, then that would definitely help him, but like again 2 times, because you're going to have more able bodies for those games, but also it gives you the opportunity to look at the likes of Turnbull maybe, or Nisbet from Hibs, or I mean, there are a number. I don't suspect that there will be a huge changes. I don't think that there will be a lot of people but there are people who he was really hanging his hat on, who since the last since we qualified in that last match, have their performances have dropped off, whether it be through injury or lack of form. The two guys from Motherwell, O'Donnell and Gallagher, are the 2 that kind of jump out immediately. And then you've got guys like Kenny McLean absolutely flying at Norwich at the moment. So is he pushing to maybe get into the starting lineup? You've got McTominay playing really, really well for Man United as a centre midfielder. So do you look at maybe a change in shape or change in tactics? There's a lot of questions for Steve Clarke to answer. I think he would be silly to kind of go too far away from what's worked.
I mean, Anthony, obviously, one thing that he's going to have to make a decision on is the goalkeeping side of things. I believe David Marshall's still not 100%. Is this when Craig Gordon's going to get called back into the squad?
Yeah, I mean, that'll be a really interesting one. If Gordon goes in, plays these games, if Marshall is still injured, and that seems to be the indication that he's struggling for these upcoming games. If Gordon was to go in, have a couple of good games, all of a sudden you would argue Gordon is the one that's in command of the gloves going into the Euros, and that would be really sort of weird and arguably unfair, considering David Marshall had waited so long and managed to get the gloves, and his heroics ultimately got us here in terms of what he did in Serbia. So it's a good dilemma to have 2 good goalkeepers battling it out, but it creates a big decision for Steve Clarke. But I suppose in many ways he'll be delighted to have that headache in goals, because as Stephen touched on, a lot of these players are out of form at the minute, and it's not always a concern, because sometimes you can be off form at club level, but then you can still turn up and do it at international level. But it certainly helps if your players are operating at full pelt at club level, and there's the strikers are not scoring. Dykes has barely scored since November. And I think Callum Patterson's the top scoring Scottish striker in terms of ones that have been capped relatively recently.
They need to make another move for Che Adams. I know, because he qualifies to play for Scotland through somewhere, and they've asked him on a couple of occasions, and I think both times he said, "Nah, I'm hanging on. I'm going to see if I can get a call up for England," which is fair dues, right? But when you're in such a specialist position, and you need somebody who's in for... Che Adams is scoring for a very, very good Southampton team who play a pretty similar system to Scotland. They're quite a sort of counter-attacking team. I would have another run at him. I would say to him, listen, you've got an opportunity to now go and play on the biggest stage one of the biggest stages in international football. Like, I know you're playing in the Premier League every week, but you can put yourself in a shop window to play against England for Scotland in a major tournament. Like, I think that if there are guys, and I understand that there are probably people screaming at their televisions or computer screens right now going, if he said no, didn't want him to play for the country. But I just don't. For me, I wouldn't have any pride in saying to these people, "You sure? You sure you don't want to come?" Because they did that with Lyndon Dykes. Lyndon Dykes could barely spell Scotland before he started playing for Scotland. So it's I don't see any problem in trying to get these guys, because if you could get him, suddenly your striker options look a bit more healthy. You've got him as maybe a number 1 striker, and you've got Dykes as a completely different alternative. Griffiths is probably not going to get into the squad now. Shankland, you're probably looking he'll be in, maybe Nisbet. So you do have options there. and all different types of strikers. But I think I would definitely be having a run at him.
I think Clark strikes me as the type who's going to be loyal to the guys who have got him here as much as he can be. I understand, obviously, there's still time for a few guys to come in from the fringes. I think Ryan Gauld might be one that will be certainly in the thoughts. Whether he comes in or not, I don't know, but he should be in the thoughts given his form recently. But I think Clark strikes me as a guy who would probably... I mean, we've seen it before when Kenny Miller used to get the nod. It was content. I really rated Kenny Miller as a Scotland striker, but a lot of people always wanted Stephen Fletcher in, or they wanted Griffiths in, or somebody a bit more sparky. But sometimes being a Scotland striker, you're just expected to go in and make it hard for defenders, go up against defenders and run the channels and all that. And I think Dykes, even if he's not scoring goals, will still do that job for Scotland. So I would imagine he would still be Steve Clarke's first choice central striker when the Euros comes around, and he's probably thinking... I don't know if he's the sort of guy that would be of a mind to go cap in hand to somebody 2 months before the tournament, trying to beg them to come into the squad. I take your point. He is the sort of guy that would enhance the squad overall, but he's probably thinking, I don't want to disrupt the harmony here by pulling too many guys in who have never been part of this journey over the past few years. And all of a sudden we've got 3 or 4 guys that weren't part of this, and they're now turning up and starting games. And that would probably cause a little bit of a, not disruption, because ultimately players have to accept that the best players will start, but I guess he's wanting to keep that squad harmony that they've had over the past few years and keep changes to a minimum. But things will become clearer tomorrow in terms of who's in and who's out. I would expect he'd probably look at Turnbull would be one that you would think is definitely knocking on the door, Gauld, and potentially Nisbet, but I think it'll be Nisbet or Shankland, I would imagine, that would go, and Shankland is probably ahead of Nisbet on the basis that he's been in and around the squad for the past couple of years. And also Shankland started scoring again, which just at the right time, because Nisbet until Saturday hasn't been scoring recently because he's not been playing. So I suppose Shankland would have the edge in terms of being named in this squad. And if you're named in this squad, you've got a pretty good chance of going to the Euros, I would suggest.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on this at the start of the show, Stephen. There was only 2 games that took place at the weekend that finished Livingston 2, Hamilton 1. That secures obviously a top 6 finish for Livingston. When David Martindale came in, that must have been his objective, was it not?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is the thing. People got ahead of themselves, myself included.
And me.
Saying, Andrew, yeah, all of us. Like, we all sort of said, where could Livingston go? 12 games? But realistically, that's back-to-back top 6 finishes for a club like Livingston. And I mean, no disrespect, but they're a small provincial club who play in a tiny stadium with hardly any fans. They've got a group of, as we've said before, honest pros that have all been kind of binned off from other places. But they just seem to have this group mentality and this bond between them that whoever's in charge, and David Martindale has managed on more occasions than not to get a tune out of them. I mean, I don't know, did you see Big Jet's goal that he scored?
No, but I have seen his social media posts that he's been putting up.
Honestly, it's one of the best goals I've ever seen. He's a massive big guy. The ball rolls into him. He flicks up with his left foot and then volleys it in with his back in it. Remember the one that Henry scored against Man United years ago? It was a bit closer in than that, but he's the same sort of technique. Flicks it up with his foot and then hooks it into the corner. A fantastic goal, and that's a guy that doesn't even play for them week in, week out. So, good on them. I mean, I don't see them finishing. I mean, it'll be a battle between them and St Mirren for 5th and 6th, but I think I would argue both those clubs will be absolutely over the moon, no matter where they finish. Both of them to have just got to that situation, and it's all about building on that for next year. I mean, obviously, you would, fingers crossed from my point of view, that Hearts will be back in the league, and you would think, I mean, Hearts, the expectation for Hearts will be that they will at very least want to be a top 6 club, so they are going to have to kind of get themselves up again. Dundee United will come stronger again, I would imagine. So it's all about next year for them, and I think, but they do have to enjoy the fact that they've got that.
Yeah, the other fixture, Anthony, in the Scottish Premiership at the weekend was Ross County 1, Hibs 2. Hibs taking the 3 points up in Dingwall. Ross County manager John Hughes thought that Martin Boyle dived like he was wearing Speedos, I quote. Hibs remain in 3rd spot in the Scottish Premiership. Hibs recovered from a Billy Mackay opener, which put Ross County 1-0 up. Kevin Nisbet's finish secured the win for the visitors. We've touched on Kevin Nisbet possibly being named in the Scotland squad tomorrow. He is still chasing a move to Birmingham, apparently. Do you think that will come off?
Well, they've changed managers, so I guess that'll be a factor in whether or not that can still materialise in the summer. I guess that fundamentally that shows. I'm not saying the ship sailed for Kevin Nisbet by any stretch. If he gets on a scoring run, he'll get his move eventually. But I think that sort of sums up why players can be eager to move, because if he suddenly loses form, I mean, he's not played for Hibs in recent weeks, and I dare say if Doidge had been scoring regularly, he might not have got back in anytime soon. So, I mean, had he not got back in the Hibs team and they didn't score at the weekend, then he could be in a position where he's sort of forgotten about. Birmingham have changed managers and his big move to England is gone. I mean, I'm sure he is the sort of boy that will come again and have another run of form, and teams will continue.
Tony, I was thinking about this the other day, and it actually comes out to a guy that you know really well, Andy Driver. It was a very similar situation. Remember, Burnley, I think it was, offered quite a bit of money for him when he was at Hearts, and Hearts decided to turn it down. And then he got injured the next season, and the next couple of years for him was just plagued with injury, and he never ever got back to that sort of level for him to be able to go and potentially play in the Premier League in England. So it just shows you that sometimes these situations don't work out for the best. Like, some people will say, Nisbet's a young guy and he's got his full career ahead of him. If he keeps going at this rate, he'll get. But it's not always that easy. If you, as you say, you drop out of form, you get a bad injury, things can change in the blink of an eye. And Andy Driver's a perfect example of that.
That's it. These offers aren't going to come in all the time. They're not remaining on the table forever. So, I know, good point, Stephen. In the Championship, it finished Dundee 2, Arbroath 0. It was Dunfermline 1, Green at Morton 0. Queen of the South 2, Alloa 3. And at Tynecastle Anthony, it finished Hearts 2, Ayr United 0. Another 3 points for Robbie Nielsen, Anthony. But again, I believe they left it quite late, and it wasn't the most perfect free-flowing football, if you like, from the Hearts starting 11.
This is Hearts we're talking about. That seems to be the way. Just get the points in the bag and the style can come later. And I mean, I think as long as they're winning, the lack of style will be excused. I think if they'd been held to a draw there would have been an outcry after it. But in the end, they get the 2 goals and it's relatively comfortable. And to be honest, pretty deserved, I think, on Saturday. As much as it wasn't the most swashbuckling performance, I think they've managed to put proper breathing space now between the. I know they've had breathing space for a while, but there's always been the spectre of other teams having games in hand now, and I think they've now got a proper advantage where you would say there is no chance they're going to blow it now. And they've won a couple of games back to back. They've sort of eased that tension that was building a few weeks ago when they drew the 3 games in a row. And yeah, it's not been pretty. It's not been spectacular. It's not been as convincing as a lot of people would like it to have been. But again, I allude to this thing about how hard football behind closed doors has been for so many teams, and Hearts are an example of a team that, again, generally are backed by a strong home crowd. Not always the most supportive, it must be said, but in some ways that probably
the exact same thing.
That probably helps drive them as well. The fear factor of getting ripped apart, and they've not had that. So the Hearts are probably a team I had in mind when I'm talking about knocking the ball about without going forward at any pace. You probably do fall into that trap when there's no fans in the ground of being a wee bit passive and just keeping the ball and waiting for something to happen rather than going and making it happen. But I think, to Hearts' credit, they have actually got enough points on the board whereby they're going to have this league wrapped up with a bit to spare. Yeah. And that was fundamentally the expectation for the season. And in terms of going forward, I don't think they're in too bad a place. I know we've discussed it in depth in recent weeks about where they are in relation to the Premiership. I think they're not Premiership ready in terms of, I don't think you could put them out in their current form and expect them to blast their way into the top 6, but I don't think they're a million miles away. They'll need a few tweaks here and there over the summer in terms of a couple of key positions are going to need strengthened, or maybe 3 or 4 key positions, but that tends to happen most seasons with most clubs. So I think they're in a reasonable position. I think there's definitely room for improvement. Of course there is, but I think if you'd offered Hearts this 1 year ago when they were finding out they were going to get relegated, I think everybody would have settled for this outcome.
Yeah, would you agree with that, Stephen?
Absolutely, 100%. It was all about just getting up this year, and I agree with that. It does frustrate me, and Anthony's spot on when he said that there are glaring holes in that team and there are things that need to be addressed. But I would be very interested to see what a Gary Mackay-Stevens and an Andy Halliday will be like in a Premier League Hearts team with potentially fans behind their back. I think they're going to be completely different prospects to what we're looking at this moment in time. So whether there are people just looking at things on the surface and thinking, he's not good enough, he's not good enough, he's not good enough, give them a chance to actually play where we belong to play, and then we can judge. If things are still the same 2, 3, 4 weeks into the season and we're still looking at the same sort of performances, then we start panicking.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
Well, Dunfermline Athletic, their Hearts' closest challengers at the moment for the title after a 1-0 win over Greenock Morton that lifts them a point ahead of Wraith Rovers, with both Fife sides having 2 games in hand. If we look at the fixtures this week, because the show's ran away from us, tomorrow night we've got Dundee there at home against Ayr United, and Wraith are at home against Inverness Cally Thistle. The one game on Friday night is Alloa against Dundee, and on Saturday, if we look at the fixtures, it's Dundee United against Aberdeen, Hamilton Accies are at home against St Mirren, Kilmarnock welcome Motherwell, and it's Livingston against Hibs. St Johnstone also play Ross County at McDermott Park as well. In the Championship, it's Arbroath against Hearts, Ayr United against Wraith Rovers, Dunfermline against Inverness Cally Thistle, and Greenock Morton welcome Queen of the South. Don't forget on Thursday as well, Rangers are in action in Europe. They've got all to play for. They've got the away goal, so it'll be interesting to see how they handle that big game on Thursday night. And don't forget on Sunday, it is the big one. It's Celtic against Rangers, 12 o'clock kickoff. Next Monday at 6:30, we will be discussing all of those fixtures and what happens on Sunday's big game. It should be very interesting. The show's almost over for another week. Thanks to everybody that's watched, everybody that's given us a comment, everybody that's joined in. Feel free to share the show. Until next week, it's been an absolute pleasure. One thing I will say is the Play On podcast, if you may know or you may not know, it's part of a State of Mind media. There's other huge podcasts involved in that. You've got a Celtic State of Mind, you've got the Soccer Supernova, Football Insomniac, the Salt and Sauce Show. Something's about to drop at 8 o'clock tonight, which is not of the norm. It's something different that we've never done before on a State of Mind media, so make sure you check it out tonight from 8 o'clock. Until next week, on behalf of Stephen Commons, Anthony Brown and myself, I'll see you next week for the Play On podcast.